So this whole course, this whole training program is designed about how you can pick a product or service and then enlist the help of others to sell it for you, right? That's how we've structured the deal, the structure, the scalability, the distribution. We've looked at ways in which you can, check into buyer perceptions and start leveraging functionality and emotional trends, or emotional buying decisions, I should say. We've just spoken about barriers to entry, and now one layer deeper than that is Porter's 5 forces. Okay. So the 5 forces are centered around competitive rivalry. We've got bargaining power of suppliers, bargaining power of buyers. You've got the threat of new entrants. And we spoke about that specifically in the barriers to entry there, the threat of new entrants and the threat of substitutes. So I'm going to quickly run through these just so you've got a very clear picture. I'll give you a couple of examples along the way, but that coupled with barriers to entry is going to be it. This is really how you've strategized your product placement or service placement in your chosen sector. So first one is competitive rivalry. This is right here, smack bang in the middle at the very center. This force refers to the quantity and the strength of the competition currently within your market. So you're already in position. This isn't you coming into a market, by the way. This is you already selling. You're in distribution mode already. You're trying to sell your product or service out at the moment. You've got distributors engaged. They're working with you. They're telling you what's what. So it's really, if you've got a number of substitute products or services within your sector, it simply means that your buyers have an alternative choice to what you're selling. So this can, you can end up in price wars, right? Because this is where everything sort of falls into play. If you've got the bargaining power of suppliers, if you've got the threat of substitutes, if you've got bargaining power of buyers, we're going to break down what that is in just a sec. But if they all have bargaining power and they're threatening your business, it's going to affect what kind of prices you are, right? We've all been there in business. You start having competition, even when it comes to as simple as, an example as simple as listing something on eBay. If you're the only one listing something, you can charge whatever you want. If you're trying to sell a car and there's like thousands of that particular type of car available, it's not like an exotic or anything. You end up in price wars, especially if there's loads with the same kind of mileage or anything. I mean, that's one example, but I hope you can see where I'm going with this. So if we could look at the threat of new entrants in particular, that's up here, right? So we covered a lot of this in the barriers to entry. It's analyzing how easy it is for competitors to enter the same market as you. Remember, I said this earlier, if the barriers are high, your price point can be high too. How much you can charge essentially. The barriers are low and it's easy to enter that market. Like this training course, it's easy for someone to compete or create a new training course with a slightly different angle. It's easy for them to enter that market. Price points have to be reduced. And in practical terms, like I say, the more money you can make if the barriers are high. So we'll just jump straight to the next section, which is the bargaining power of suppliers. And this is the power sitting with your suppliers. So if you're manufacturing something, if you're producing something, it's how much control they have on your profit margin. Because think about it. If you're creating, camera straps, if you're creating sneakers, if you're creating some kind of product, in any way, shape or form, if your supplier changes that price point on you, you could be in a pretty bad situation because it can completely take your entire profit margins out of sync, which means if you're paying certain percentage points to your distributors who are potentially enlisting sub-distributors and everyone's relying on a set margin, and now that margin's being screwed with because your supplier's changing the numbers on you, that could be just very, very destructive for your business. But equally, it's also something that you can benefit from too. If there are a lot of suppliers in your market, so if there's a lot of companies that can produce what you make, that, what tends to happen is you can actually control the price that suppliers charge. And of course, the higher the volume you have, the more control you have. Because remember, we go back to economies of scale. If the more you're purchasing, the more buying power you have, and you can control the bargaining power that your suppliers think they have. So that's an important one too as well. The next one is the threat of substitutes, products or services. Now, this isn't to do with new competition. Okay. This is to do with the ability to switch from your business. It's about switching only. I'm going to write this here. I want that to be very clear. It's not new companies. It's switching. So for example, let's go back to that example with Bang, the energy drink. They were entering a market which had a lot of competitive rivalry, but they were a substitute. So this was now something that those companies had to be concerned about because people could switch from, let's say, Red Bull to Monster to Bang. So they had to engage in different, and they used, and by the way, the reason why I'm using this as an example is because they used a very, very strong distribution network. They used the influencer network on the social media. They did no other advertising outside of social media. And it wasn't just paying to advertise. They had influencers drinking Bang, recommending Bang. That's how they did all of their sales. So that's how they got people to switch. But if you're Monster or Red Bull, that's what you've got to be concerned with, right? So be mindful of that. And we're going to switch to the last of the forces, which is the bargaining power of your customers or buyers. And what that is if how much bargaining power do they have over the price of your product? Are there enough substitutes out there? The more substitutes that they have, the more options they have available. And if you're not that different in terms of what you're offering, and it's really just, I'm going to give you something here. If you've structured your entire distribution plan based on how much money you're paying your distributors, this is where you can go wrong. Remember I said you want to also make it easy for your distributors to be able to sell, which means you have to have a good product, or you have to have a good, a very easy way for them to execute against the sale of your deal. This is an example of that, because if your customers have plenty of other options and those companies can reduce their price, you're going to be in a tough spot. You want to make sure that you're very concerned or very conscious of the bargaining power of your customers in the market that you're in. Your distributors may take the project because there's a lot of potential margin to be made. They might like the fact that it can scale. They may like the fact that it's a great deal. But if there's enough substitutes out there, you're going to have a bit of a difficulty with regards to selling, especially if there's too many choices. So that's when you link back to what I said earlier. I'm not saying this is your stopping point. This is when you go back to buyer perception. So I had this problem with the parking lots, with the real estate. People had so many options out there. We had to lean on certain emotions. So don't let any of this be a stopping force. Don't go thinking through your product idea, think, oh God, there's so much competition in this market I'm getting into. Oh no, there's too many suppliers, or there's so few suppliers for what I'm trying to build, and they can jack prices up. And I'm not telling you any of this to be a threat to you. I'm telling you to be conscious of this so that you can execute against your plan properly. So when I knew that I was going into a space where there were so many substitute offerings that could provide real estate value, that could give a good yield, I had to think outside the box. And that was why I went back to buyer perceptions and targeting customers outside of my normal reach. So I tapped into the IRA market. I started leaning on fear. I started looking for ways I could drag an emotion into something that was very functional and create a result, which is, of course, selling. So now we're going to move straight on to the reasons why you should and the reason why you shouldn't build your own or produce your own product or service, and the reasons why you should or shouldn't build or produce your own or use someone else's, I should say. So that's going to be the next section. Should you do it yourself, or should you use someone else's? See you there.